from Emily O'Reilly, the EU Ombudsman.
Good morning, everybody, from the European Parliament building in Brussels, and thank you for the invitation to address this important seminar, and I'm very sorry not to be able to be with you in person. It's now been almost 14 years since I worked in journalism, and I don't think I need to tell this audience how much has changed since then, with the explosion in new technologies, and particularly in social media. For me, I think the biggest change has been the blurring of the lines between professional journalism and just about everything else capable of being communicated via a smartphone. Virtually all media, from the big networks and newspapers to small online outlets, increasingly use copy and images submitted by readers and viewers, while anyone is capable of becoming their own publisher without having to move from their own home. While this democratization of media is positive in many ways, it poses understandable challenges, not just for those trying to forge a career in what I'll call conventional media, but also challenges for those attempting to frame their output through an ethical prism. The principal challenge is how to have that ethical base keep pace with technologies that allow unfiltered content to pass into the mainstream, and in a world where regulators and others struggle to put some controls on what is, in many instances, essentially uncontrollable. Our tolerance for this, of course, is also becoming higher. We are now clicking on images and content that a decade ago would not alone have been incapable of being transmitted, but the viewing of which, let alone the publishing of which, would have been deemed to be at least insensitive, at worst unethical. If you take last week's murders in Westminster, as the days went by and more bystander images were submitted, or more and more security cameras images accessed, it became possible to witness the actual deaths of those who so horrifically lost their lives. And we have to ask, what effect does that have on us, either individually or collectively? That's one element of this issue. Another is the much talked about fake news that we've heard so much about in recent months. Again, the new technologies, allied to short attention spans and a failure to ask questions, has led to a situation where, arguably, democracies and their electoral systems can be subverted. A further element concerns the increased use of algorithms, so far perfectly legally in most cases, where our smartphone choices in themselves lead to a type of distortion in what Google and others choose to serve up to us when we click to find out about anything, from the French elections to a new dress. I recently had the experience of a colleague sending me a text message from a work phone with a new SIM card in it. I couldn't tell from the number who it was, obviously, because it was a new number, yet the phone was able, nonetheless, to suggest to me exactly who it was, because of other information it had gleaned, possibly from other texts. It was, for both of us, slightly creepy. So where do we place journalism and ethics in all of this disruption? As individual journalists or individual outlets, the power and control you can exert is limited. The media also live in a highly competitive 24/7 world where worth is too often measured by clicks and where the pressure to be controversial, to exaggerate, to distort is therefore very strong. It is, of course, very easy for someone now outside of that world to urge those within it not to succumb, but that really is the only valid option. And in time, it may even be the best commercial option. It is said that what is seldom is wonderful, and I believe that those journalists, those media outlets, who continue to rely on provable facts and well-researched analysis for their output, will continue to attract, perhaps even in increasing numbers, those who want to shelter from the rest of the media storm. Many of us have lamented the double whammy of Brexit and Trump, but in the true spirit of never letting a good crisis go to waste, those two phenomena have actually galvanised, not demoralised, mainstream media, and certainly in the UK and the US. Online subscriptions have gone up, particularly in the more mainstream centrist media, and you can sense a new energy in the journalism itself as journalists fall back on their old but most essential role, that of holding administrations to account. When Donald Trump was first elected, it seemed as though he was going to trample all around him, given his own will, his own ability to communicate to a particular but important audience, and of course because what is supposed to be his own party, the Republicans, had emerged dominant in the US Congress. There was a further fear that well-picked judges would further cleave to a Trump agenda. But just in recent days and weeks, we have seen the rise of the checks and balances, the holding of the president and his administration to account, the assertion of the democratic basis of the United States, and a reinvigorated media monitoring his every move and reporting on same. But the media still has a huge job of work to do. It's not even that media outlets have the luxury of just thinking about journalism. Every advertising dollar and euro has to be earned with great difficulty, and there is a constant tussle to hold the line and not descend into a populist morass. But if we cannot see an alternative, then what is the point? I don't have to tell this audience the point of good journalism. It is as essential in a democracy based on common values and the rule of law as the other key institutions of a state. But unlike them, it is generally a commercial entity and cannot rely on the public purse, no matter how worthy or important its work. What it takes, just as it does in every important institution, is good leadership. Leadership that intuits the value of what their broadcaster or newspaper or online product does and moves heaven and earth to make sure that it thrives in order to fulfill its overarching essential duty. I recently watched a documentary on the thalidomide scandal, where the iron will of one single man, the former Sunday Times editor, Harold Evans, achieved for the survivors of that tragedy something that had seemed impossible at the start. And he did this in the face of everything from initial public indifference to commercial hostility to libel writs and other efforts to shut him and the investigation down. He didn't face the particular challenges of today's media landscape, but he did face those which were particular to his own and which were just as challenging. There is no simple panacea, but believing in the worth of what you do is an excellent start. And really, it's the only thing that ever actually matters. Thank you for your attention and enjoy the rest of the seminar.